Hi, and thank you so much for joining us. In this video, we're going to talk about why first focal plane is a must-have for today's hunting rifles as well as long-range shooting. All right, we're going to break this down into a couple small video segments, and in this one I want to talk about the rifle scope in reference to first focal plane and why you should consider it. So this is going to be part of our Extraordinary Guide to Accuracy series, and we're going to start going over all of the parts, pieces, bits and bobs, as well as getting into and learning the art of long-range shooting. In this video, we're going to start talking about the rifle scope, and the reason I chose the rifle scope first is because it really is one of those things that allows you to take the training wheels off your rifle and learn to basically run it to its full potentials. You can do so much more with it, so much more efficiently, so much faster, so much more accurate with a first focal plane quality scope. I can honestly say that over the years, first focal plane is probably, besides the invention of the ACE, one of the biggest steps forward in allowing us to run a modern rifle the way that we can now. So let's talk about a couple of things to take into consideration when you're getting ready to select your scope, and particularly things to watch for when you get into first focal plane. So number one, more is not always better. When you're selecting a first focal plane scope, remember our goal is to use the reticle now. So a first focal plane scope compared to a non-first focal plane scope, what that means is your reticle will get bigger and smaller in direct proportion to the target. So as we zoom the rifle scope in and out, the reticle gets bigger and smaller in direct proportion to the target. That allows us to use the techniques called hold over, which we can use for holding elevation and making shots without ever having to touch our knobs, as well as a technique called hold off, which is for basically holding our wind. And when I say more is not better, I mean that when I'm talking about magnification, the multiplier, as well as the reticle itself. The more cumbersome or the more grid squares you see all over the place, it makes the reticle more confusing in very fast situations where you want to make that shot quickly. Now, how quickly can you make a shot? This is the amazing part when we teach people how to use a first focal plane scope. A couple years ago, we had a gentleman come through the school who was a retired Marine. He was head of global security for a huge organization. So anytime their executives traveled, he was in charge of making sure that they safely got to and from everywhere they had to go, traveling around the world to all the parts of their industry, right? Beside him was a 15-year-old girl at that time. Her name was Amanda, who had never taken anything long-range shooting before in her life. By the end of day 2, Amanda was laying a royal butt whipping on this retired Marine and loving every minute of it. And it's actually very fun to watch. So, you know, with the shooting school here, we tell everybody you're going to get about 7 years experience in 3 days. And that's huge, and that's no exaggeration. Our goal is to get you out to 1,000 yards and learn everything you need to know to get there to enjoy it, as well as when you leave to understand what's going wrong when things are going wrong so you can correct it and continue on enjoying it, right? But one of the things that we teach is a technique called hold over and hold off, using the scope so that way we can really run a rifle way more efficient and faster than ever before in history, right? So here's the scenario. We set a target up at 700 yards. The shooters can set the rifle up, pointed in that direction, finding the target, but then they have to stand up behind their gun. The gun is laying on the ground in front of them prone. On the word go, beep. They had to get on the gun, engage the target, find it, shoot it, hold over, hold off only. They were only allowed to use their reticle to make the shot. This went on for all of the class until we were basically doing a shoot-off. So when anybody missed or the slower shooter, they come off, and we just kept narrowing it down, sort of some fun stuff to shoot, right? And eventually we wind up with somebody who was the top gun in the class. It wound up with being Amanda and this retired Marine. And we have it on video, though we can't post it. I mean, she's a young girl at the time, so we don't want to put anything on the internet that 20 years from now would just live there forever. But when we got to the 700-yard line and it was a shoot-off between these two, she engaged that target and hit it in 6.7 seconds starting from the standing position, beating the Marine. That is what you're capable of doing when you learn how to use a reticle properly with a rifle. That's amazing. Same thing happens at 300 and 400 yards. So we had some classes teaching some hunting techniques. And they got down in the 5-second range from the standing position. So their guns are pointed at the target. There's no doped out in the guns. They're using a technique hold over, hold off. And we finally have students breaking into the 5-second mark. So think of the scenario where this would be really important. Besides competitive shooting, you get out on your elk hunt, you know your gun, you know it well. You know at 300 yards, the average gun's right around 1 mil. You know, that give or take a little bit. Well, let's just say your rifle's 1.1 mil. You always keep an eye on the wind. You have an idea of what direction it's blowing from and sort of your holds. But there's the elk at the edge of the field, 300 yards. Somebody hollers out, there he is, 300 yards. You jump on your gun, you hold over 1.1 mil. There's no wind or the wind's blowing a direction you're compensating for. You pull the trigger, the animal falls down dead, and everybody around you goes like this. What was that? It happens that fast. Now, when you get off the gun, you make a shot like that. Don't say anything. Just blow on your knuckles, right? Wipe on your shirt and let everybody else think that Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett has something in your gene pool, right? And let them tell the stories later in the evening. It has validity. But the bottom line is when you learn how to use these scopes and you select a scope that's proper, these are the things that you're capable of doing. And these are amazing feats, right? So let me just give you a couple quick pointers on this. Number one, more is not better in the reticle. Don't get a very confusing reticle that's going to be really hard for you to sort of catch and find the different hold points. A very clean design like the Skimmer 3, Skimmer 4, the MR1 and the Leupold, the Skimmer series that's in the Collis. They are really nice reticles, and we've talked about this in our podcast in the past, that aren't intrusive when you don't need them and easy to find your marks when you're looking for them. So right away, reticle choice and selection is key. You don't want to make it too confusing. And the other part is magnification and even as far as the tube length. So a lot of people think, well, I'm going to get in long range shooting, I'm going to buy a scope that's 2 to 32 power. Sounds good on paper. But what I want you to think about is you're swinging from 2 magnification to 32 magnification. That is a 16 multiplier. What that means to you as the shooter is when you're at max power, looking at your reticle and first focal plane, as you dial down to 2, your reticle got 16 times smaller. So be really careful when you're selecting your first focal plane scope that you don't fall into that trap, because you want to stay in that like 3 multiplier. The Leupold 6.5 to 20 was a perfect example of this. The reticle only got 3 times smaller from 20 to 6. So you could use it more in the lower settings, which would be more traditional to the hunting scenarios. You didn't lose the lines on the reticle so fast where it was just a target dot. Same thing in the Leupold 6 to 24. This is actually one of my favorite scopes. This has a 4 multiplier, 6 to 24. And so as we're dialing it down, even down to 12 and 10 power, we can still see the reticle to use it. Now the Leupold 5 to 25, you picked up 1 extra magnification going from 24 to 25, but now you've made your reticle get 5 times smaller going from max to min. So at the same magnification on both scopes, the 5 to 25 is going to appear smaller, the lines are going to appear finer. And so these are the little things that you want to make sure that you really pay attention to when you're buying equipment to set up for long range, because it's the little things that collectively will matter to either make it a great experience or a very hard experience, or a very hard experience to learn through. And so it can be frustrating. All these little things that you don't really think about start coming out. You know, you can't dial back to find a target quickly. You got to stay at max power. And so you're not there looking for the target. You're all over the place. You can't really find it. All these other issues come up. Where if you choose everything properly, you can dial the magnification down to a reasonable magnification. You can find your target easily because it's a big field of view. And in Amanda's case, shoot a target and hit it in less than 7 seconds from the standing position, which I think is incredible. So I don't want to make these videos too long. There's going to be several of these just talking on scopes. This is the first one in our series called The Extraordinary Guide to Accuracy. In the next couple videos, we're going to continue on talking about the scopes and things you should be looking for, some of the brands, some of the key features that sort of set them apart, and try to get you set up first talking about what optics and what you're going to use the rifle for. So thanks for taking the time to join us. If you really like the video or the video content we're putting out, I would like to ask for you to subscribe. Also hit the notification bell if you enjoy the video. If you wouldn't mind sharing it, that would be really great. This is the first of many videos that's going to be coming out over the course of the year and eventually leading into our long-range shooting school itself, and we're going to try to give you lots of tips there too. So this is video 1 of our Extraordinary Guide to Accuracy series. Thanks for joining us.